Good afternoon. This is Professor David Weiss once again from the Institute for Dispute Resolution and its flagship program connecting bridges and borders that sponsors worldwide our podcast series on many different subject matters that have an international theme as well as real current events. And today we have a really interesting discussion, and it's around sports. Sports is something that transcends and all nation states. It really transcends politics, business, and deals more with about humanity as a whole. And it can certainly be something that all of us, I hope, would agree, can bring people together as well. My guest today is Joe Corley, who is a very important man historically and presently in the world of both karate and also in ultimate fighting. And I'm happy to have him here. And you'll notice that he will be talking about an entity that he owns called PKA. Joe, welcome to our show.
Glad to be with you, David.
So Joe, first let's start off with what is PKA?
PKA originally was the Professional Karate Association. Our first world champions were crowned in Los Angeles in 1974 on ABC's Wide World of Entertainment. And then we built the sport over these succeeding decades. And so we've had just tremendous fighters from around the world. We're not really in the mixed martial arts world, and we're not in ultimate fighting, so to speak. We are the initiators, if you will, of kickboxing on television.
And over the course of how long has PKA been around? Let me ask you that question.
Well, it's 1974, so if my math is good, a little longer than I've been alive. I think it's 40 plus 6. So I'm only 41, so it's been around just 5 years longer than I have.
So from the beginning of that period of time to now, can you give us a little bit of understanding from PKA? What have you seen change within the sport itself?
Oh, there's so many changes that have happened over the years, but in reality, when we did the first event, fighters in karate were doing point fighting, which means they got close to each other, but they didn't hit each other. And so the first PKA event in that LA sports arena went with the best fighters in the world. We brought in the best fighters from virtually every continent. And Joe Louis won the heavyweight title. Bill Wallace, Superfoot Wallace, won the middleweight title. Jeff Smith was the light heavyweight champion. Isaiah Duenas from Mexico won the lightweight title. And I was actually a judge there at that event. I was basically healing from a spinal fusion that I had done about 9 months earlier. And so once the first event happened, which was like in a ropeless arena, and we went into the rings, and then when ESPN was born, we had already done events on NBC and CBS. We actually averaged a 6.5 rating and 20 share on all of our events on CBS. NBC, we actually hit a 10.1 rating with our World Heavyweight Championship, which is an unheard of kind of number even in those days. And once ESPN was born, we were represented by Trans World International, TWI, or known as IMG. And then we did about 1,000 hours of programming on ESPN, and we grew as the network grew, and we were always among the top 3 rated shows on the network, and we're always number 1 in the 18 to 34 category. And what we did essentially, David, is we brought together the best of what is the kind of the spirit of the martial arts. As you know, the idea in martial arts, it's a mind-body experience. And so we showed to our public out there the kind of young men and ultimately young women that would develop from the martial arts. And so it was really what we call a vertical integration of the sport. So at the base level, you had the kids in the classes, and then at the tournaments, you had people like you would have seen in the Karate Kid movies. And then those ones that were great at that could then graduate on to the what we called full contact for a long time, but it ultimately became known as PKA kickboxing.
It's interesting. I like to explore a bit more about what you said about the mind and the body, and really the soul. But before I do, and we sort of go into that a little bit, tell me a little bit about your story. I'm very curious to know how you got involved in this, why, and what keeps you going.
I'll give you the short story version. My dad was career Army. He was actually the stenographer for Franklin Roosevelt at the Tehran Conference. So he was there with Stalin and Churchill. And when I was very small, he was deployed a lot. And he came home, and my mom had me still in white shoes when I was a year old, and he got rid of the white shoes and put me in brown shoes. And then when I was 6 years old, he handed me a pair of boxing gloves and a baseball glove, and those two things became my favorite things to do, actually. And we lost my dad when I was 10. Actually, he passed away at Walter Reed Hospital, and you know. Just as I was watching the president these last few days, going to Walter Reed, it brought back a flood of memories there. But the last month he was alive, as an example, I was going to a day camp up the street. And when I went into the day camp that day, there was a kid outside, and he was throwing rocks at a squirrel. He was trying to kill this squirrel. And I said to him, "Leave the squirrel alone." And he said, "Well, you'll have to make me." So I hit him with an uppercut in the stomach. He fell down on the ground. He turned purple. And the woman who ran the camp came outside and said, "What's going on here, boys?" I said, "Well, he was trying to hurt this squirrel. He told me to stop him, so I did." She said, "Oh, okay," and went back inside. You can imagine that wouldn't happen these days. But I left the school. I actually walked out the front door as a 10-year-old and went down the street to visit my dad at Walter Reed. I didn't have permission to leave, but I was just so frustrated there that day. He said, "What are you doing here?" And I told him. He said, "Wow, that's cool." He didn't say cool in those days, but he said, "Wow, that's good. Are you hungry?" And so he gave me his meal. And the point being that he taught me early on that if there were people that were bullying you, or someone that you cared about, or an animal, then you would try to talk them out of it. But if you couldn't, you would take action. It's like one of our memes says, "Violence is not our focus, but it's an option." And when my dad died, my mom re-enrolled me in military school. I'd gone there in the first grade, and then second, third, and fourth grade, I was with my dad in Europe. And when I came back to the military school, I found that half the kids there had been sent there to get a military education. The other half had been sent there because their parents couldn't deal with them at home. So the half that couldn't be dealt with at home were ones that my dad had talked to me about as a kid. And so I ended up with a record of having more fights in school there than anybody had ever had at GMA, and actually got busted in my senior year. And then the funny thing about that is the captain and graduate of Annapolis who busted me then, and gave me the sermon about that not being the right thing to do, later had me come out and help him raise money for his Rotary Club by doing a live fight for them there in the gymnasium some years later. So I read Napoleon Hill's book when I was 19, Think and Grow Rich, and I was in a small karate school here in the Midtown section of Atlanta, which would be something now like your Midtown section there in Manhattan. And I had read the book, and I didn't know what was going to happen, but we had these ideas. And so one thing led to another, and then we ended up doing 1,000 hours of programming on ESPN. Interestingly enough, an encounter I had with Ted Turner in his office one day is the thing that broke it all loose. And I've told a lot of people one of my favorite stories is about the book God Winks, and says when God winks at you. And so when I listen to the Tony Robbins meditation ritual each day, and as you think back about things that happened along the way that looked like they would have been coincidences, but really made a difference in your life. Ted Turner had a program executive whose job was to say no to everything. If you came to him and asked him for something, he would just look at you with an impassioned look on his face, not say anything. And when you got finished, he would say no. And you just couldn't engage with him. So he had just said no to me for the third time in a year. I'd been introduced to him actually by the chairman of Cox Communications at the time. So I thought he would at least listen carefully. But on the way out of the building, Ted Turner says, "Oh, karate guy." And he has a sword in his hand, like with a 29-inch blade on it. He said, "What would you do against this, karate guy?" And I said, "Well, if you knew what you're doing with it, you'd probably hurt me, but I think I'll go ahead and take you out." So I started backing him down the hall. And as you know, he had been to Georgia Military Academy himself, but he had only been there for 1 year, and then he didn't do so well, so they sent him to another school. So he's swinging this sword at me, and I'm backing him down the hall. And all of a sudden he gets this idea. He says, wait. He says, "You're the little guy, right?" I said, "Right." He said, "And you need the superstation, right?" He had just started WTBS at the time as the superstation. And so he called all of his executives in the office. He said, "Well, next week, the producer for All in the Family is doing a hearing in the U.S. Congress, and he's saying how we can't have the superstation because they'll violate all of his copyrights on all these programs. And will you go up there and speak on behalf of the superstation?" I said, "Yes, absolutely, I will." He says, "Well, then what can I do for you?" I said, "Well, we're doing a heavyweight title fight in the Omni in May, and I'd like you to, carry it on the superstation." He said, "Done." And his other guy said, No, I just told him we couldn't do that." And Ted says, "Shut up, we'll do it." So we did that. It was a tremendous fight. We got a great video, and I went and knocked on the door at CBS, and I said, "I want you to look at this fight and maybe consider buying it." And they looked at it and patted me on the head and said that, "It's really kind of you to ask, but we don't air programming from other networks. However, we would like you to be our announcer for our upcoming fights that we have, because we like the way you describe the sport." And I said, "Well, I'll be happy to do that, but the people that run the organization won't go for that." And he said, "Well, then we won't do the show." I said, "Okay, I'll do the show then." And so anyway, that turned into CBS, which turned into me being an executive in the PKA, which turned into ESPN, and I did all the commentary for all of those networks. And then we went up, started doing events on Showtime and so forth, and the programming just has done very, very well all over the world.
And it's amazing stories. I mean, it's always fascinating, and for those that are listening to this podcast of a new generation, it shows the linkage between our generations in many different ways of history, about circumstances, opportunities, and it's a very inspiring background you provide, Joe.
Yeah, that's the short story version. And
Yeah.
when you go to 30,000 feet and you look down, it's just amazing all the things that did happen, were supposed to happen. I'll just say succinctly that Joel Osteen talks about it a lot. He says a lot of things, a thing happens 30 years ago and you don't really know how or why it happened, for 3 decades, but there it is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's as Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I'm paraphrasing his full quote, but life's a journey, not a destination. And then I'll add my own adage to that, and that is to say that during your own journeys, you will find many roads that will link up to things from yesteryears. But some of it may be part of your own inner soul, part of it may be part of your own destination to be. And it really goes to this mind, body, soul. And I'm curious, within the PKA experience, and we'll talk a little bit about PKA today and what it means. Give us some interesting stories about what you have seen that has really impacted young people from all over the world, or especially in the United States, that are some great positive, inspiring things during a period of time that we face right now that can be less than inspiring due to the circumstances as a global world that we all face.
Well, as you were asking the question, my mind went through, all the ones that I know the stories of, but the Chuck Norris story, I guess, is one that's as impactful as any. We just recently completed with a friend of ours, Chuck Norris, on the book of the 2020 Who's Who in the Martial Arts. And so I actually got to write the entire Chuck Norris story, from, a kind of an absent father when he was a kid, to a young man that went off into the military, and in Korea, earned his black belt in 13 months, came back to America, and just had this positive mental attitude about everything, and presented himself in just a tremendously good way. And as a result, he attracted great people to him, Steve McQueen being one of them who convinced him to get into acting. And so he did a couple of films with Bruce Lee, and then Bruce Lee passed away when Bruce was only 33 years old. And then Chuck kind of stepped in as the person who would become, the next big martial arts star. And Chuck now has the Kickstart organization, in which he goes back and has so far impacted 100,000 kids, where he's raised money from all over the world, financed it himself most of the time, raised money from all over the world, and he teaches inner city kids all the way, all over the state of Texas. I think they have about 39 locations now that they do it in. And these kids have gone off to Yale and Princeton and Harvard, and, kids that otherwise wouldn't have had that opportunity. And we've just got so many stories, that, they're just countless. But you're talking about mind, body, and it's that martial arts spirit that I can do it. And no matter what happens, no matter how many times I get knocked down, I'm going to get back up. And in fact, I put up a shot with Chuck and all these other people. I always use Teddy Roosevelt's "man in the arena" thing. It's not the critic that counts. It's the man who gets in there and fights with his blood, sweat, and tears. And if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. And I think that's what we try to instill in our martial arts kids all over the world. Go for it. Don't let anybody define you.
I love that. About what the sport can do.
Yeah.
How you talk about the experiences of Chuck Norris and especially, I think, resonates very much so today. You think about gang violence, you think about youth that don't have families, and the gangs become sort of their families. It's prevalent across this country, prevalent really in many places in the world.
Absolutely.
Where can PKA and sports like PKA find a new footing? Certainly, as you said, from even the stories you've already shared, it's there. But we're going to find a new footing to help these young kids who, frankly, are facing very, very difficult times, not just because of COVID, not just because of economics, but obviously whether it's within their family structures, whether it's because of poverty issues, inequality. It's almost like an elevator of challenges before they even get to an age of adolescence. How can PKA help in that narrative to get them back onto a path that's more inner strength based for themselves?
Well, it depends on the timing, I think, as to how fast it could happen. But there's some key players that we've met along these years. I met Dan Cathy, who's the president of Chick-fil-A, when he was around 40, and he was there at one of our Battles of Atlanta Karate Championships, and he was there with Yoel Levy, who was the symphony director for the Atlanta orchestra that was one of our black belts. And he told me that he had been in our class at Woodward Academy, Georgia Military Academy, when he was 8 years old, and he still had his green belt hanging in his closet from the times that I taught him, and that was very important to him. And so if you looked at a triangle and you took Chuck Norris's kickstart, and you took someone like Dan Cathy, and you took someone like Ben Carson, who grew up in in the inner cities of Detroit, and you had those kind of people who said, we're going to commit ourselves to bringing this to the grassroots. Kids can play games in school like that, but it's still ingrained. We haven't evolved it out of our DNA for boys yet, where they want to be able to protect themselves and they want that confidence. And we haven't evolved it out of boys yet, where they want to have a dad, a father figure. And I look back, as a dad deprived boy, because I had lost my dad at 10, my martial arts instructor became that role model for me. And so many coaches in so many sports have been that for so many kids. And we've heard those stories over the years. But martial arts has kind of a way, through the belt system of white to gold to green, so that any project that you or I ever work on, we break it down and we say, here's a milestone, here's a milestone, here's a milestone. And I think karate and kickboxing and martial arts can do that with the right people at the top of it. And, to take it a step further, you and I talked recently about the magical hockey win of the United States in the Olympics, and what that did on an organizational level for the team, but more than that, what it did on a worldwide basis to help bring some people together. Just yesterday, I had a call from my friend in Iran. I had been there with him 10 years ago. And as I was sitting there, I was looking across the table and I saw Ahmadinejad's two brothers sitting there, and they were endorsing this thing. And it occurred to me then that team matches between the countries would be great. And then you and I started talking about that recently. And I think that that's something that we could actually do, where teams could see how the players of the teams really fight with one another, but it's not fighting, in the military, the warrior sense, but a way to help settle some scores, but settle them in a very patriotic way for both sides. And win or lose, you have some, it becomes a win-win, regardless of who wins or loses the match. It becomes a win-win for the competitors and the countries, I think.
Well, it's important, I think, because what it does is it allows people from other cultures, from other backgrounds that may not be familiar with those backgrounds or even those cultures, to realize that we're all human beings. And even in that, this is probably what the Greeks did and why they started the Olympics. It was the concept of creating, an opportunity where Greek city-states could interact with each other without picking up arms and killing each other. So it's really interesting about what you're saying here.
Yeah, I was also going to say, in the production of those, if you go through the backstories of each of the team members and you see the kinds of trials and tribulations that it took them to get to where they are, then you see, like you said, we're all the same human beings. We're just under a different flag, but I think it does show the commonalities of all the things that we as free Americans would like to see shared with the rest of the world.
No, absolutely. It does provide a unique opportunity of exporting a different form of soft diplomacy, which I think is important and necessary today, especially through sports. So tell me about PKA today, and what maybe some of your visions are for PKA within the both karate and mixed martial arts, as well as other mediums that you would find somewhat analogous to where PKA fits into the position around the table with other stakeholders.
Well, as we've been through, a number of growth levels over the years, and when I met Dana White a while back, I just congratulated him, because I had said he he had taken across the finish line our dream. In 1979, we had the dream to connect all the dots the way Dana did with the Fertitta brothers in Las Vegas. And they managed it so well, they promoted the event so well. And in our approach, we're looking for the greatest strikers on the planet. You know, in mixed martial arts, you have ground fighting and then you have striking. And so PKA is known as the group that had the greatest strikers on the planet. And our rules are different than the other organizations out there for striking, but it's more like it's more like American football, say, than it would be Australian rules football. You know, where the safety of the athletes is put first and foremost, and the action, the way we have put it together and organize it, calls for great offense. And in all of our sports in America, from basketball to football to you name it, the rules have been revised over the years to create a great offense. And that's what we can do in PKA. So we're not kicking each other in the legs and we're not hammering each other on the ground when they're down. You have to do those martial arts skills that you learn in the karate school first. When I fought Bill Wallace for the world middleweight title, the advantage he had over me was he could do a 180-degree split, you know, just like a ballet dancer. He could pick up his left leg and have it travel and hit you in the head at 60 miles an hour without shifting his balance. So that's a great skill. And if you don't have that skill, you can't do it as well as the next guy. So those are your martial arts skills. So in some of the kickboxing rules, they kick each other in the legs in order to damage the legs. And I've always said that would be like in baseball, if I could take the bat out to the pitcher's mound and hit the pitcher in the arm with it, you know, the arm that he throws with, that would take away some of the offense that we enjoy watching, which is the pitcher throwing the ball. So the PKA rules have been like that since the beginning and still remain like that. And there's an audience out there of about 100 million martial artists around the world who would love to see that kind of activity on a regular basis, and it wouldn't in any way dampen their enthusiasm for or their appreciation of the more graphic kind of fighting, if you will. It just gives them a more I hate to say artistic, but it is the martial art.
It is. I would actually, the word I would perhaps, what I think of when as you were speaking, it's another dimension. It's really adding another dimension to the sport as a whole, where you bring more creativity, but you also bring strategy. And not that Ultimate Fighting does not have strategy. It certainly
it does,
does. But with martial arts, you're bringing another dimension to that strategy. It's like playing chess. Instead of playing a one-on-one sort of game and only thinking within a first level sort of dimension, you're thinking about, you know, second, third, fourth level dimensions to your moves, which means you have to think about things 2 and 3 steps ahead of whatever move may be coming your way, not just the first move or the first reaction.
And that is true in all kinds of combat. So just to clarify, the same kinds of intensity and thought that you just talked about is going to happen whether it's MMA, mixed martial arts, or whether it's kickboxing where you kick somebody in the leg, or where it's PKA style where you're not doing that, where you're kicking above the waist and creating more offense, if you will, as you go on. They're all going to have those elements to them, and there's an audience out there, a big enough audience for all of them. It just gives us a way to really find the greatest strikers on the planet.
So when you're looking at from the greatest strikers, and we look into yesteryear, and we'll take two examples and one you already mentioned, Bruce Lee. Let's take a look even Muhammad Ali, right? Wasn't he sort of trained, if you may, in many different levels of how to box, which may incorporate some of the characteristics of what PKA and mixed martial arts also teaches.
It's wild you say that. I mean, as an 11th grader in high school, you know, I became a fan of Cassius Clay and followed him all the way through. And then our friend Jeff Smith fought on the Ali Frazier 3 card as the semi-main event. And so we negotiated all of that with Don King at the time. And it was really interesting to see that happen. We got to spend some time with Muhammad Ali then. In today's world, if you don't know him, if your viewers can look up Vasily Lomachenko. Lomachenko, in my mind, is the greatest boxer that has ever lived. He can do everything that anybody has ever taught or tried to learn or tried to do, and he can do it against fighters who've got 40 or 50 knockouts under their belts. In our sport of kickboxing, we've had some really great ones. My friend Jeff Smith that fought the Don King selected future Muhammad Ali of the kickboxing ring was named Kareem Abdallah, and Jeff Smith fought him. Jeff was named as one of the greatest fighters of all time, along with Joe Louis, who we lost to brain cancer back in 2012. The man that I fought for the world middleweight title retired undefeated with me actually doing the commentary for his retirement fight was Bill Superfoot Wallace. He starred with Chuck Norris in the movie called The Force of One. And I'll when you get a chance, I'll send you some highlight reels of these guys, and you'll get a chance to see what I'm talking about. The kind of things they can do was just incredible.
Well, I think I may have mentioned to you once, and it's in my my historical blood is my great uncle. He was Ali Stoltz, who was from New Jersey.
Yeah.
And Ali was the first Jewish light featherweight boxer.
Wow.
Who, unfortunately, did not win the fight. And there may be some additional colorful scandal around why. That was picked up in a movie that Marlon Brando eventually makes.
Wow.
But, so we have some really interesting historical perspective here, both on a personal level and within the family. But what I want my audience to hear from this, and why it's so important that we talk about different mediums within our Connecting Bridges and Borders Spotify system, is that PKA reflects many things that are very basic and complicated at the same time. The basic part is about humanity and how we can come together. And from a trajectory of humanity, listening to you in this brief discussion, the complexities are in the hard work, the diligent work that one has to undertake in order to really become a master at their field, and what they do with that, both in how they live their lives and how they concentrate and dedicate commitment, perseverance, may have pain along the way, but that journey of utilizing something like this form of sport really resonates at many multiple dimensions in one's life, and frankly can also help communities grow. It can also help those that are lost find a pathway as young adults that may be seeking, as you said, mentorship. And it also has a way of bringing cultures and other people together in a way that is not just competitive, but also provides some way of a common ground.
That's absolutely right. And when you think about a sport like ours, if you execute it the way our mission has always established, it is to work literally from the ground up and the top down. So what I mean by that is from the ground up, you're teaching the values and principles of being a good human being at the basic level when you're teaching people. And then you go through your fighting stages, and then you go back and you teach others, and then you teach the teachers, and then you give back to the art and sport. And at the end of it, I earned my 10th degree black belt back in 2016, along with my friend Jeff Smith on the same day. And the certificate reads, it's the humility of a grandmaster. And it talks about those levels of black belt that you go through, grandmaster being the 10th degree. And it talks about humility. And then it actually quotes Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits on the certificate. And he says, humility is the mother of all virtues, and in that way integrity becomes the father and courage is the son. So when you think about how all that ties together, and that being our function of American martial arts and carrying on into the PKA, then I think it ties together all the elements you just talked about.
This has been a really, I think, intriguing conversation. And I paused for a second because I was going to say interesting, but I don't think it does it. No, and I don't think it does it justice. It's an intriguing conversation that I believe and I hope, as our audience listens to this discussion that you and I have had, they think not only about PKA and martial arts, but also just about the humility of one's soul, one's life. We're only here for a short period of time on this planet, and while we're here, how much contribution can we do for the development, not only for ourselves, but those that we must coexist with, and for the betterment and improvement always for humanity. I'm going to end on a quote you'll appreciate, and it's something that you'll know who had said this, but he said, "I hated every minute of training, but don't quit." Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, I was going to say that was one of Ali's best, and he said, even if you dream of fighting me, you better wake up and apologize.
But the way I see it from the perspective that's important is it's not just about the training in terms of what he was doing in boxing or what you do in martial arts. I mean, of course, your career transcends beyond just martial arts, as you alluded to the audience. It's many books unto itself, your life story, with really global recognition around the world for what you've done. But I think what it resonates for me, and I hope my audience will perhaps think about it, is that really the training is about our lives in general. We're always training. We're always growing up. We're always living through this journey, as I mentioned before, that Ralph Waldo Emerson says is not truly a destination in the way we like to define it. The key word is don't quit. Keep going. Keep persevering through. And that is really the inside, that essence, if we will, of the mind, body, and soul.
Yep.
So I want to thank you for being part of our show today, Joe. It really is inspiring.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been inspiring for me as well. And
that's great.
Us some important insight into your life, your life's work and dedication. I hope it's an inspiration for others. And I'm sure many will be perhaps Googling and finding out more about PKA for those that may not be familiar with it, and wanting to see how mixed martial arts can play a role in their communities, in their lives, and perhaps on TV as time goes on.
You got it.
Thank you so much for being part of this.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
This is Professor Weiss from the New Jersey City University Institute for Dispute Resolution and Connecting Bridges and Borders flagship Spotify and podcast show. Always thinking international, bringing it local. And once again, I bid adieu until our next time.